Hi and welcome to our annual press conference, live from Leverkusen, Germany. What a year 2023 has been. We achieved some great milestones, but were also confronted with many challenges: economic, environmental and social. So let's take a look at what this means for us. Today, we're not only presenting our Covestro fiscal 2023 results, but also our Scope 3 climate goals. And we are welcoming our CFO Christian Baier to his first Covestro annual press conference. So stay tuned, we're about to start.
Our world is currently facing unprecedented challenges, such as wars, global inflation, or high energy prices. Yet, we must not lose sight of the long-term developments like climate change. The chemical and plastics industry is one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, but we are also part of the solution. With innovative products to foster a truly sustainable world and cope with global challenges. Take urbanization. By 2050, more than 2/3 of the world's population will live in cities. This increases the need for constructing new energy-efficient buildings and refitting old ones. They need to be best insulated against heat and cold. Also, sustainable mobility. Electric vehicles need to be as light as possible, and a dense network of charging systems must be installed. To keep the materials produced and used in the loop, we need circular economy to be the global guiding principle. And we need plastics, but we need them to be utmost sustainable, climate neutral, and circular. Covestro is committed to becoming fully circular and climate neutral for its Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. We need to work together and drive the transformation forward if we want to remain successful in the future. And in 2023, Covestro made further progress along this path.
Good morning and welcome to this year's annual press conference for Covestro AG in Leverkusen. We're pleased to welcome those of you who are here on site, and also just as pleased to welcome those of you who are following us online. This will be an interesting and hopefully informative press conference. I'd like to mention a couple of things. Safety is always very important. If there is a problem, the emergency exit is just behind you and the meeting point, but I assume we won't need to use these. Before I hand over to our CEO, Markus Steilemann, and our CFO, Christian Baier, I would like to make a few housekeeping announcements, as usual. Photographs and films, you know that if you've been to such annual press conferences, they will also be taking photos and films for our journalists and for us. We also look forward to your questioners, hear from you on the spot, and for those of you who are joining us online. For those who are joining us online, I'd simply ask you to raise your virtual hand, and our team in the back office will then tell you when it's your turn, and then you can also, when it's your turn, after you've been called on, you can turn on your video and audio. Last but not least, we will be giving you some forward-looking statements. That means that everything that is said today is based on today's expectations and forecasts. So now I'd like to introduce the hosts for today. First of all, Markus Steilemann and Christian Baier. They will be giving you an overview on the past fiscal year and an outlook on the current fiscal year. And they look forward to answering your questions at the end of their presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand over now to Markus.
Thank you, Lars. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to everyone who is here in person, and also to all of you who are watching and or listening to us on your computer monitor. I look very much forward to taking you through the journey of Covestro and discussing it with you. It is marked, of course, by our strategy and, of course, by short-term challenges. Therefore, we're going to talk about steps en route to sustainable growth. We will present you with the business performance, and there's something that we did prepare for you today exclusively, and that is to introduce you to our Scope 3 targets, and then we will also tell you how we intend to implement our targets en route to our Scope 3 vision. I would like to give you some commentary on a topic that is in all our minds and is very interesting to us all, and you as well, I believe. That's why I'd like to talk about it right away. And that's the state of affairs with the discussions with Abu Dhabi National Oil. We're conducting discussions with ADNOC, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, in line with our legal obligations in a constructive and open manner, of course, and also in the interests of our company, our shareholders, and all other stakeholders. As usual, progress and the result of such talks depend on the capability of both parties to reach an agreement on the topic on which they have different opinions. Of course, we will keep you updated with the results of our discussions, of course, in line with our obligations under the European Market Abuse Directive. Now let us take a look back at fiscal 2023. Before I do that, however, I would like to put this year in context. This year was a year in which we acted in areas of geopolitical tension, the type of which we haven't witnessed since the end of the Second World War in Europe. Also due to these geopolitical tensions, but also due to the ramifications of the pandemic, we had to deal with a weak global economy. There are a number of different influential factors that you can see here on the slide, which curtailed demand. Therefore, for Covestro, but also for the entire chemical industry, 2023 was a very challenging year. This is also demonstrated by our sales markets. Let me give you some more detail on this. First off, as I already mentioned, we had a global weakening in all core industries that are supplied by Covestro: construction, automotive, furniture, electronics, and household appliances. The auto industry was the only exception. In 2023, we saw growth of 10% year on year. At the same time, e-mobility is a segment within the passenger vehicles segment, which posted a growth of 30%, which is slightly down on the previous year, but quite a leap. Despite these strong growth rates, we are still at a lower overall sales volume of passenger vehicles than it was the case in 2019. By consequence, 2024 will be another challenging year based on our expectations. It'll be marked by demand weakness on the one hand and high volatility on the other. This is why, in addition to the operating challenges, to the strategy, we have continued to develop the strategy with resolve. We control how we play. That is our motto. We determine how we play. This also includes our strategy being implemented despite all of the imponderables and driving it forward with resolve. We are also considering AI to address energy efficiency topics in order to push production. We have succeeded in saving 20 million euros in energy costs through different energy management. For example, at our large-scale plant here in Germany, in Dormagen. Based on existing long-term programs, we have continued to push forward with our cost reduction programs, and we have achieved a mid-range triple million euro amount in savings. As a result, at the same time, our investments in sustainable growth have been continued to the tune of around 800 million euros in research and development and production. Climate neutrality is another issue on our agenda. Green energy supply is one of the focal points. I'm extremely proud to be able to say that we have concluded a big contract on renewables in the United States of America, and that the share of renewables in electric supply had been increased from 12% to 16% last year. In 2025, we intend to have a share of 25% renewable energy as a part of our climate strategy. So Covestro clearly has the potential of being a commercially successful contributor to the green transformation. But the difficult market situation is demonstrated and reflected by our figures. Group sales dropped considerably from 18 billion in 2022 to 14.4 billion. EBITDA also dropped considerably year on year to 1.1 billion in 2023. A positive piece of news is that once again, we had positive cash flow to the tune of 232 million euros. This means that Covestro remains a cash generator. The greenhouse gas emissions of our company rose slightly. This is largely due to the energy mix in the German and US grids, however, which, due to technical difficulties in the United States and due to the overall energy mix structure in Germany, more coal energy, in addition to the emissions, have caused the greenhouse gas emissions to increase substantially. For 2024, in addition to pushing forward with the strategic issues I mentioned earlier, our concentration is on our operations. That's where our clear focus lies. There are 4 main areas in this respect. First, as you know, at the beginning of the second half of 2023, and throughout the entire year, we had some large disruptions in the supply chain of Covestro, driven especially by 2 chlorine supply issues at German locations. The task at hand here is to make sure that our plants are safe and reliable, sustainable, and energy efficient in their operation. We have made great progress here, and we believe that by the middle of the second quarter, we will have completed this work and our plant availability will have returned to the level that we need in order to be able to use the levers that we have at our disposal. We're talking about sales of our own products from our own plants. We want to increase them substantially, so growth from within, based on the strength of our plants, and we hope that the improved capacity utilization will improve our EBITDA. Furthermore, continuous focus on our customers in the specialties business. Here again, we successfully demonstrated in 2023 that the specialties business, in terms of margin position, is much better than the performance materials business. That was evidenced by their performance, and despite this, the margin remained stable despite the drop in revenue and sales. Absolute results were almost identical year on year. They were just down 1 percentage point. In terms of costs, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to continue our resolute cost discipline measures throughout all areas, and this is something that we're going to do in 2024 as well. Our fixed costs are going to continue to be reduced sustainably. And in 2024, we expect that despite the inflationary environment, the fixed costs will remain at least flat, and that we can offset inflation through other reductions. At this juncture, I would like to hand over to my colleague, the CFO, Christian Baier. This is his first annual press conference for Covestro. Christian, I am happy that you're here today and that you are going to spend time with us today. Thank you very much, and talk to you later.
Thank you very much, Markus, and welcome to all of you here on site and those who have joined us online. I'm very pleased to be with you today. This is my first annual press conference at Covestro, and I'd like to give you some details on fiscal 2023 as well as an outlook for 2024. Let's take a look at the year, and this is the following chart. You will see that we had a weak demand, Markus mentioned that this was a weak market environment. The challenges are relevant, but we focus on things that we can indeed change. That's very important today, and this is something that should be made clear in today's presentation. It's important to note that the environment had a fall in selling prices, and we also had weak demand throughout our entire portfolio on a regional basis. When it comes to the perspectives here, we're about minus 6.8% reduction in volume, and this relates to all regions, but it is different from one to the next when it comes to the positioning, and the overall sum is 14.4 billion, which was our group sales. Let's take a look at the individual regions. Start with EMLA, where Europe is the most important factor there, and this is the weakest region in fiscal 2023, with a reduction in volume of about 10%. Take a look at the key industries in this region. For example, in the automotive industry, there was a slight increase, but on the other hand, when it comes to electrical and electoral segment, this was a clear significant reduction. In North American, we see that we had a change in volume, and this was also where automotive was positive, but the field of construction showed a significant drop. A similar picture in APAC, where we only had minus 3% reduction in volume. Here we saw automotive and furniture were slightly positive, and in construction, this was a critical factor in 2023. If you take a look at these volume shares, and if we look at the next charts, you will see that the EBITDA changed from 1.6 billion euros to about 1.1 billion euros in 2023. Then, of course, the volume and the effect of this is a very important factor in this reduction. In addition, you can see the price delta, the difference between the change of the selling price and raw materials. This is something that also had a negative effect in 2023, in particular due to the weak demand. And that means that we had a significant reduction in the cost for raw materials, but due to the weak demand, this is something that was only slightly compensated for with regard to the reduction in selling prices. But here too, what was really something that we can have an influence on? This was cost management in terms of production costs and fixed costs. And this can be seen under others, where we see 338 million euros, and this had a major impact on the market weakness, and we can see that the reduction in EBITDA was 1.1 billion euros, was cushioned, as I said, by our proactive activities. And you can also see some slight indications of improvements on the market. If you take a look at Q4 of 2023, you can see we had 132 million euros EBITDA, and this is significantly above the year-over-year figure, and this is for the first time. And you can see that there we had a negative EBITDA. And the same when we look at this in terms of volumes. After 6 months, this is the first time that we are above the year-on-year quarter, 3% volume growth. This is a relevant increase that we see in Q4. These trends in EBITDA can also be seen differently if you take a look at the various segments, performance materials and solutions and specialties. Let's take a first look at performance materials, and this is more a commodity business where we have major plants, large volumes, and also the importance of availability of our plants and cost-efficient production. This segment is more influenced by the business cycle, and that's why EBITDA and also sales declined significantly more than the group as a whole. Here you can see a negative price delta, which means that at the end of the day, at the end of the year, we had 576 EBITDA was generated, and the margin was 8.6%. And here we see a relevant reduction compared to the previous year. A positive trend here is that in Q4, we see a positive volume effect, and this is also shown in the first few weeks of the first quarter of 2024. When it comes to the volume trends, and this is something that we also have to consider prices and margins. Here, I must say, for the first half of 2024, we are a bit reticent here. When it comes to EBITDA and performance materials, we expect in 2024 that we will have between 400 and 800 million euros due to the cyclical aspect here. This is a relatively broad range that you can see, but we're quite confident that we can make use of the levers that we can effect with regard to availability of our plants, and we believe that we can control a lot of things ourselves here. When it comes to solutions and specialties, this was very stable in 2023. And here we saw that sales, due to the price and volume drops, the sales went down, but we had a very stable EBITDA at over 800 million, 817 million euro to be more exact. And this shows the resilience of this business sector. And this is where we work together with our customers and we talk about individual innovation together with our customers. And here we also focus on the portfolio for the final use, and we can control it such a way that in difficult situations we can still see good developments. So in this way, our EBITDA margin went up to 11.2%, and for 2024 we expect that solutions and specialties will be a very important pillar for the future success of Covestro, and we expect an EBITDA which will be clearly above the level of 2023. This was a year where the market environment was very difficult, and it's very important for us here to focus on things that we have control over. And when we talk about cash flow, we need to ensure that on the one hand, we are considering sustainability in our plants and investing therein, and also investments for the future. On the other hand, we want to ensure that we have very efficient capital structures, and we want to ensure that we can also work in a difficult year when it comes to profitability to still have positive free operating cash flow. And we managed this in 2023, 232 free cash flow, million free cash flow. We're above our forecast, and this is something that we've been focused on, and this is something which happened in a year where profitability was clearly under pressure. This was achieved by focused measures when it comes to working capital, and of course we did not also neglect the availability of our goods for our customers. This is a very difficult balancing act, which our team did very well on in 2023. When it comes to the total amounts, the cash flow and the profit and loss statement, we can see that at the end of the day, we have a negative amount of minus 198 million euros. That's the net income. So we, as the Board of Management, have decided that for 2023, we will not be paying a dividend. This is in line with our dividend policy, which is focused on a positive net income and a payout of between 35 and 55% of the net income. Now, let's look to the future, and we can take a look at 2024. Markus Steilemann mentioned this already. We see that this will also be a challenging environment, especially considering the first half of 2024. We can also see volatile underlying conditions. We at Covestro can make a big difference here for issues which we have control over: efficiency, and cost reductions, as well as investments in the future. And in the current environment, this is also a question which is extremely important for the future. Our figures that we have for 2024, that we expect in 2024, is an EBITDA range of between 1 and 1.6 billion. Free operating cash flow is positive between 0 and 300 million euros, and a ROCE over WACC of -7 to -2 percentage points. We also want to continue reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We can see a range in 2024 of between 4.4 and 5.0 million tons of CO2 equivalent. And moving in this direction as well, we've been investing in the future of these issues. And here we want to move towards circularity and our vision of climate neutrality. And Markus Steilemann will be giving us more details on that in just a minute. Also, when it comes in particular to our Scope 3 goals.
Thank you, Christian. I'm very pleased now to give you some further details on the completeness of our orientation towards Scope 3. We're going to give you a bird's eye view so that you can gain an overview of the whole situation and then focus in on each individual blade of grass to give you some insight to the individual details. We are always trying to push for individual solutions together with our customers in our core markets. And there are two things that dovetail each other, one being the circular economy. That means bringing our products from a linear economy to a circular economy, making them circular enabled, and also to have more and more renewable energy at our disposal, because that's the only way that a circular economy makes sense. We have to make sure that we reduce carbon. This is why I'm extremely pleased to take a look at you, to take a look with you into our workshops to demonstrate what we've accomplished last year and what we intend to do in the medium to short term. In 2023, from where I stand, we crossed a lot of milestones in terms of sustainability, and we consolidated our position in some areas. What's important in the circular economy is to objectivize, to determine whether you are really doing business sustainably. That's why it's important to gain the services of external parties, in this case, a certification agency, and ask them if they can certify that what we're doing is correct and what, from an objective point of view, we are doing right or wrong in order to push for sustainability. This is why we are certifying ourselves according to the ISCC Plus standard at 16 sites in APAC and in Europe. This standard has either been introduced or has been confirmed. The renewable energies now take up approximately 16% of the electrical supply to our plants and offices over the year. That's an increase, and the absolute value would have been higher if in Germany, in terms of the energy mix, we had burned less coal in the grid, and if in the United States we hadn't suffered the ramifications of a technical outage of a supplier. By 2026, we want to improve this share to at least 15%, and as I said before, or at 25%. And we are very, very proud that we have the first power purchase agreement for 90 megawatts of renewable energy with an existing partner. This partner is in our portfolio. This circular economy, from our perspective, makes us a pioneer among global market leaders. Chemical recycling technologies have been offered for all our big products, MDE, TDE, TDI, and polycarbonates, where they have been introduced or refined. And in the following, I'm going to give you some further details on this to make the deal even sweeter for you. Let us look at the strategic fields. The expansion of renewable energy, as I said in opening, is an absolute key factor. Only if you have circular products manufactured with green energy do you really have a positive effect on the environment. Therefore, we have taken the 5 existing power purchase agreements and supplemented them with another 4, which we're planning with our external partners. And here we rely on cross-industry partnerships, electricity industry, gas industry, the chemical industry. It's important that we strengthen recycling technologies, and here we see strong demand for plastic waste in recycling, which is relevant to us. In particular, we're talking about high-quality plastics, some of which are very difficult to recycle. This is why we are charting along 2 different paths, the one being the materials recycling. And here, polycarbonates play a very particular role, and this is because polycarbonates go through material recycling through a plant, an investment in Shanghai. Up until 25,000 tons can be processed, and this capacity can be expanded up until 60,000 tons by 2026, and that's an annual capacity. We've also found solutions for polycarbonate which couldn't be recycled in a material process, and to break it down through a chemical process so that can be reintroduced into the cycle. So as you can see, the task at hand is always to use different technologies to solve your individual problems instead of prematurely determining one technology for everything. Now, moving to cross-industry partnerships. We have a cooperation with the Selina Group that is based in Poland for the sustainable production of polyurethane-based hard foams. They're used in the building sector. These products are already in the market, and they're supposed to serve the purpose of ensuring that in the very difficult polyurethane recycling field, we can introduce good products to the market, and these highly efficient polyurethane products contribute to building energy efficient homes or to retrofitting these homes. And last but not least, the innovative processes we have for alternative raw materials, for example, replacing petroleum raw materials with green raw materials are labeled with the CQ label. That's the Circular Intelligence brand that enables products to discern when they buy the products that they're doing something good for the environment. It's certified, it's objectivized, and in total, they're helping to reduce the carbon footprint as opposed to what they would do with classical products. There's the pilot plant for bioaniline, which is of notable mention. It's not far from us right here in Leverkusen. It's the first of its kind, and it ensures that MDI, the very valuable material that is used in insulating materials for homes and refrigerators, for example, can be manufactured without fossil raw materials. It's all done on a plant basis, including sugar, for example. This is what I now want to go into detail for you so that we can see the scale we're talking about. We're talking about millions of tons of plastics that are going to be transitioned away from an oil basis to a plant basis. We're starting from first generation biomass. That means that we haven't managed to transition it to a second generation. That would be waste from agriculture. But so far, we have succeeded, as I said before, in using a plant-based material to produce industrial sugar, and this industrial sugar is used to react enzymes and to undergo a chemical process in order to obtain bioaniline, and then you can also obtain MDI from this, and one day this MDI may be found in the insulation in the building in which you either live or work. It's important to us that we demonstrate by doing this that sustainable business, doing business not based on fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and gas is profitable, that it's technically feasible, and that it doesn't reduce the quality of the end products supplied to our customers. This is just one of many examples. There are further examples that also help us to achieve our Scope 3 reduction targets, which we mentioned earlier today. This is because converting from fossil fuels to sustainable fuels is a core element of our reduction target achievement in the area of Scope 3. Therefore, let us now just briefly talk about these ambitious targets. As you know before, with respect to Scope 1 and Scope 2, through to 2035, we intend to become carbon neutral. The intermediate step at 2030 is minus 60% compared to the level we had in 2020. Now, if you want to go into further detail here, Scope 1 means that you're talking about emissions that are created directly here due to production, due to the manufacturing of our products. Scope 2 emissions are produced by energies that we buy, electricity, heat, a vapor that has to be produced as a result. And then we take it a step further into Scope 3. Scope 3 relates to all emissions that are generated in the manufacture of the upstream products before they come into our plant. And then also the emissions that are created once the products have exited our plants. We also want to make sure that the products have a long shelf life and service life. It's therefore important not to tend to Scope 1 and 2, but also to Scope 3 emissions, because they account for 80% of total emissions. But these are the most difficult to manage because the most Scope 3 emissions are generated by our customers, and suppliers, and we have to undertake a joint effort with them in order to reduce these emissions. Nevertheless, Covestro is rising up to this challenge to make sure that we can push for a carbon neutral circular economy. Now, what is our further roadmap? Let's go to the figures first. Now, as of 2021, 21.3 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions in Scope 3 were emitted. Added to that were about 6 million Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Of these 20 million tons, in absolute terms, we want to go down to 14.9 million tons in 2035, and then by 2050, we want to be absolutely climate neutral in Scope 3. This means that if you were to assume that from 2021, if we didn't do anything, we were to continue to grow, and this continued growth would generate additional carbon emissions, and all told, we would have to reduce 10 million metric tons. So 7 compared to 2020, and another 3 million if we didn't do anything, if we simply continued to grow but emitted more greenhouse gas emissions. This is how the target is put together, where by 2035, we want to save 10 million tons of carbon dioxide, and we want to get from 20.3 to 14.9 in 2035. Now, what are the specific levers that we want to pull in order to achieve this? Well, we're talking about 4 levers here, and if you can follow me for a minute, at top left, the hexagon at top left, here you see reduction of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions of our suppliers. Now, where can this happen? We have a lot of raw material suppliers. They, of course, have emissions in their production. So they have their Scope 1 and 2 emissions. The object here is to put heads together with them to develop solutions as to how we can reduce these CO2 emissions. We're talking about supplier management. On Monday, a global supplier management event is planned at which this very topic will be discussed. And I can tell you that people can't wait to participate in this seminar. And this is because the suppliers want to go in this direction. They are looking for customers that intend to go down this path together with them. Unfortunately, therefore, on Monday, some of them are going to have to stay outside of our buildings because we just have too many registration requests, and so therefore we will have to have some of them attend virtually. The second hexagon is sale of products based on alternative raw materials at top right. Now, we're talking about developing markets right now. Therefore, some of the products are much more expensive to manufacture. And here we are talking with pioneer customers to identify the potential for selling these products profitably on the market. At the same time, we are looking for alternative ways of making these raw materials much cheaper than they are today. Here we're working with suppliers. But in order to make sure that we achieve a profitable path without regulation, we want to make sure we achieve our goals. At the same time, we are working on make projects. Make projects include the bioaniline project I mentioned to you earlier, for instance, and here it's important that we're not just talking about the existence of alternative raw materials, but we're investing in production technology, manufacturing plants in order for these raw materials to be available for Covestro. Now, whether we license this technology later on, whether we make our own investments, whether we actually let third parties invest is something on a completely different page. But this is another way that we're going to move towards a circular economy. We're talking about bioaniline, as I said earlier, but there are also other areas. HNDA, which is a raw material that is especially important to us. With the company Jano, we're developing it, and the object here is to create raw materials for the coating and adhesives industry that are green. Further supporting measures are increases in recycling rates, and here we're active in terms of chemical recycling, as I mentioned earlier, as well as in the area of mechanical recycling, and of course we're talking about reducing emissions in the supply chain. So this has to do with whether the products are arriving at our plant by road, rail, or air, because there's potential that is substantial for reducing emissions in this transport segment. So we're talking about very, very targeted measures that will enable us to take a leading role in the transformation of industry. And I've just given you a couple of very current topical examples of this. So very slowly we're coming from the very high cruising altitude back down to Earth to see exactly what we're doing on a case-by-case basis. Now, moving on to cooperation with Encina. Here we're talking about raw materials. These are oil-based raw materials that are going to be replaced by recycled materials. And here we have a special toluol. For those of you who are not versed in the field of chemicals, these are the materials that you need to manufacture soft foam for upholstery, for seating upholstery, or rigid foam for buildings and refrigerators. We have PPAs in this specific case with RWE. And here electricity comes from a North Sea offshore wind farm for the Antwerp production site. The term is from 2026 to 2030. And from 45% electrical energy supply in Antwerp, this is one of our biggest European sites, we will go up to 60%, and this will save 130,000 tons CO2 equivalent every year. A partnership with Henkel has been forged not too far away from here at the little town right up the Rhine called Düsseldorf. And here we have bio-attributed polyurethane materials. Here we're talking about high performance wood adhesives that have a much lower carbon footprint. Why is that important? Well, it's a material that is used in the order of tons, and often it is glued together. Therefore, it is very important to come up with measures here in order to reduce the carbon footprint of the building sector, for instance. And last but not least, polycarbonate sold under Macrolon RE or Macrolon RE. For the first time here, we have tested the use of a biocircular material that is used in laptops, mobile phones, etc. The material comes from recycled alternative materials, bio-based materials that are then processed and chemically refined in order to provide them as a raw material as Macrolon RE within the scope of our CQ brand for use in electronics. So as you can see, with there just 400 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, but if you look at how many hundred millions and billions of smartphones and laptops are going to be sold every year, if you then extrapolate this into the future, you can identify the potential that this measure will have. Therefore, let me give you a brief summary now. I believe that the initiatives that we presented to you, although many of them are still in their nascent stages, quite clearly demonstrate that Covestro has undertaken a commitment to the entire chemical industry in order to align itself with a circular economy. And the ambition here is to be climate neutral and to dovetail these two things closely. Today, we already are pulling important levers for achieving our Scope 3 targets that we presented to you for the first time today and for becoming climate neutral. We also gave you an overview of the roadmap that we went through last year and the roadmap that we will continue to chart from now on. We are continuing to improve our operating performance under the Transform to Perform motto. And the objective is to make sure that we actually achieve what we are claiming, and we are focusing on short-term operating performance improvements in order to continue implementing our long-term strategy named Sustainable Future in an environment that will remain challenging in 2024. At this juncture, I would like to thank you all for your interest. Christian, Baier, and I look very much forward to hearing from you and any questions you may have. I'd like to hand the floor back to Lars Böke, who, as facilitator, will help us organize the Q&A session. Thank you very much, and I look forward, and well, we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Markus. Thank you, Kristen. I'll be trying to take you through these questions. Before we begin here in the room, I'd like to say a few things to our colleagues who are watching us online. We're going to begin with the questions here in the room on site, and then we'll go over to the online viewers. And then I will ask you to raise your virtual hand. And then, of course, we'd like to ask you to unmute your microphones and switch on your cameras. And after we finish, there is light lunch for all of us, but I do see there are some questions, first of all. So why don't we just get going now with the Q&A here in the room, first of all. I don't know who the first one was. Who wants to get going? Mrs. Koenig from the Rheinische Post. Go ahead. I have two questions. Thank you very much. You talked about cost discipline, and this is necessary everywhere. What does that mean? Does that you mean you'll be shedding labor? And how many redundancies were there in 2023, and what is your maximum goal of 1,700? And then the locations. You didn't get the electricity price you wanted. Are you not happy with the German government? Meyer is also closing down one of the factories. Is that something that is being considered for Covestro as well? Yes, let me answer the first question with regard to cost discipline. Cost discipline is everywhere. It's very important, and we are now in the process when it comes to hiring new positions. We're being very selective there. And if you talk about the number of full-time employees and reductions, here in 2023, we had a mid three-digit number that were reduced over time, and this was done basically organically and achieved through cost discipline, as well as significant improvements in our other costs. This is also seen in combination of the two. Are you planning to reduce any jobs? In 2024, we're working on improving our efficiency. We're investing in certain areas, artificial intelligence and other things as well. We also have to make sure that our colleagues can continue to be working even more efficiently than before. And we're also thinking about sustainability, sustainable reporting. The topics are becoming more complex, and we're managing them in such a way that we're investing in efficiency. And the second question, was I disappointed about the price for electricity? Well, the prices in Germany, gas and electricity in Germany, are moving, and this is clearly above the area before the crisis, but gas and electricity have now gone down. So that means that this is a positive trend, and if there are no additional geopolitical tensions or shortfalls, then of course we can assume that as far as gas is concerned, that they will stabilize at the level they are now. And electricity prices, these are much more complex. This is due to the structure of the electrical market, because the generators and the prices, that's not the issue. What we often forget is that this was something that was an emergency measure. I'm not really disappointed because we didn't get the industrial price for electricity that was asked for. We fight for things that make good sense. And as I said, it was always an emergency measure, this question of a industrial price for electricity. And now we can say that this is something that needs to be seen positively. But we do need a electrical market to make that we can see that have more competitive prices for electricity. In chemistry, nothing works if we have electricity prices that are at 2019, because these prices for electricity were up to 2 or even 3 times higher than what we had in regions where we are competing internationally, the United States, for instance, and in particular China. That's why it's important for us to not just talk about Germany alone. We have to take a look at the overall structural reforms. And in this context, we have to have a competitive, energy-intensive business here in Germany. Well, if I did, I would have said something on that. I'm sorry the question was off mic. Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions on Scope 3 targets and how that all works. And how do you see it? What are the major risks for your strategy? Is it something like getting hydrogen in order to make steam climate neutral? China, maybe they are less involved in renewable energies than we are, and so maybe are more difficult in switching over your suppliers. How are things developing there? And another question, You talked about the CO2 equivalents in 2023, and in your annual report you say that it was primarily in Baytown at that site. What is the risk that something might happen? In other words, that your plans do not go through? Well, you know, there are a number of different topics we have to keep separate here. Thank you for your question, first of all. What we have to keep separate is short-term effects, and these are due to effects of energy mix in the utilities if there is some problems. And if I look here in the audience, I also have to look into the colleague and our colleagues that are joining us online. So that's why I'm not always looking at you directly, which I normally like to do. So now I'm looking at the camera as well, in camera 2, and hello to all of you who are following us online. To be specific, when it comes to structural developments at Covestro, this depends on us being in a position to be able to use more and more green energy, to procure green energy, access to the capacities that need to be expanded in terms of solar, water, hydroelectric energy, and be able to get this in the sites. And we have to go and take a look at this country by country, or in the United States, one state by state basis, where we see that the supply of green energy can be provided. The more we do this strategically, the more green energy we have in our portfolio, the less we would be dependent on individual suppliers that can no longer deliver. So one thing is we have to manage by means of contracts in private economy to get the green energy. And the second important point is that we have to work with our suppliers and come up with a chain which is free of crude oil for our interim products. And this can be from recycled material, or it could also be the result of biomass and bio-based raw materials. So that means that we are quite optimistic here that we can manage this and change the value-added chain. The risk is no different than in any other business. If you have forward-looking statements here, there is a certain inherent complexity there. We need cooperation, and we need this with our partners, but this is in our interest, and it's also in all of our businesses. If you have industries that don't work, of course, then it will be difficult in selling. And the same is the case if you want to work without fossil products, if you want to have products without these fossil raw materials. If we don't find a partner who wants to do so, then it becomes difficult. But we see some that have a huge amount of interest in supplying us and to reduce their scope 1 and 2 footprints. So that means this is something that will also have an impact on scope 3. That's why I'm very optimistic. But at the same time, you have to be open. This strategy has risks, and these risks are part of normal business activities and part of forward-looking statements.
Mrs. Becker and Mr. Fröndorf. Good morning. I have 3 questions. You spoke of the volumes developing quite well recently in December and January, and now again. Is this a gleam of hope in respect of the entire economy? And in connection to that, what is your take on China, the United States, and Europe? My second question relates to the healthy energy prices. Does Covestro primarily buy its energy in the Ruhr area? And does that make your exposure quite high compared to others? And maybe you could tell us how much you benefit from this. The other is fixed costs and workforce reductions. Now, I know how you can reduce the fixed costs there, but how you do that with plants? You spoke about higher utilization. Does that mean fewer plants? Is the volume distributed amongst fewer plants to make capacity utilization higher, or you just hope for higher demand? Well, perhaps you can answer the first and second, or maybe the first and third, maybe the spot market and... Okay, and no one's going to do the second one. That's fine. Now, with respect to volumes, in Q4, we had an increase in volume to the tune of 3.1% across the entire group. This is an important factor. However, it also has a lot to do with the fact that we were capable of improving our plant availability considerably since in 2022 we had some problems there. Now, this doesn't automatically give you a statement about the development of the final purchaser market. We are in a fortunate situation in which, in the regions in which we are active, we either have cost leadership or we are one of the cost leaders in this context. In other words, we are in a position of being able to produce these things very cost efficiently and also to sell them at a reasonable price and therefore earn money with them. Now, with respect to the development of the Baier markets, well, this is still a challenge, and we believe it'll remain so in the foreseeable future. We saw some good developments in the beginning of the year, also in relation to China. And you mustn't forget the Chinese New Year's celebration in January, and in the middle of February, we have to see what happens. But we can say that from a seasonal perspective, it's going to be an increase in volume towards the spring, simply because the construction industry will pick up there. And at this juncture, I would like to come back to the fixed costs. On the one hand, in administration, in office jobs, and as Markus just said, artificial intelligence is becoming an increasing factor in our production processes. This gives us the possibility to create simulations in order to improve the efficiency of our plants. There's a big difference between just turning some screws and pulling some levers manually in a plant to make it more efficient, as opposed to creating entire scenarios and simulations according to which you can optimize your plant. Now, with respect to energy, in 2022, our energy bill was 1.8 billion euros. Last year, we were in the order of 1.1 billion euros, and this year we expect that this sum will reduce considerably once again. Considerably, what does that mean? Well, I think that we'll fall below 1 billion. I don't have the figure at the figure at the tips of my fingers, but we do want to maybe come back to a situation where we used to pay much less for energy. We used to be at 600,000, so we're still talking about levels that are far above the levels before the crisis. Now, by region, we can say that 2/3 of the costs are attributable to Europe and to Germany in particular. So the problem of access to affordable energy is essentially a German problem, much less a European problem, and almost no problem worldwide. This is what I wanted to make clear. It doesn't really play that much of a role if you buy your power on the spot market or if you have the long-term contracts, because it's not the generator prices that are the issue, but it's the tax burdens, it's the usage fees, the transmission fees, etc., that drive up the electricity prices in Germany, making them completely uncompetitive. This is why, if you look at the structural drop in gas prices, if you look at the buyers of electricity, almost none of that effect is passed on, because there are just far too many additional costs that are added to that.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, at the beginning, Mr. Steilemann, you said that the progress that you'd made with your discussions with ADNOC would depend on what you can agree on if you're of a differing opinion. Could you tell us what the issues are? Where are you of a different opinion? And then I'd also like to talk about your sustainability goals. BASF began this in Europe. They talked about having or being involved in offshore products or projects. Is that something you might also consider? And I'd also take a look at my notes once again. In the annual report and the forecast, when you talk about the AG, you assume that there will be a much larger minus amount this year. In other words, first of all, does that mean that in 2024 there will also be no dividend paid out? And what about the situation when it comes to minimum payout? We talked about a lot of, it was announced that you would have a minimum payout that would have to be made. ADNOC, Well, that's quite simple. When two parties discuss things, that's good, and it's good that we talk about specific issues and content, and this is not something that is discussed in public. And that is my answer to your first question. So I'd like to, when you talk about what topics it would be, I can't tell you what the topics are where we disagree. And the second question, I have to look at my notes, BASF and involvement in offshore wind parks. That's more a strategic decision, and a strategic decision that Covestro in recent decades has considered again and again. They've reviewed this again and again. Will we become a company with our own power plants to produce our own energy? With very few exceptions, we decided against this. And one of the main reasons is, first of all, this would require additional capital. In other words, we would only be able to invest much less in sustainable product development, less investments in artificial intelligence, R&D, and that is why we're investing the way we see things today, the funds that we have available in those areas instead. And as I said, the basic strategic decision is also the fact that energy and wind plant operators, that's their core business. They know what they're talking about, and they know how to go about it. And they supply us with electricity at competitive prices in long-term agreements. That's why we think that we are very happy with this strategy. And now with regard to forecasts and the individual statements, these, of course, the financial statements, the group development is what is decisive for us when we talk about our decision on a dividend. For 2024, it's much too early to talk about that. We're focusing right now on the guidance from 1 billion to 1.6 billion euros and to manage this as best as we can in terms of EBITDA. And we also have our clear-cut dividend policy of 35 to 55%. In addition to that, it's also important for us to focus on a very good balance sheet structure. That's important for us so that in all phases and in economic developments, we will be able to make investments in the future. And that is what's very, very important for us. The dividend for 2024 is something that we can talk about next year. And I'd also like to say Baier did have positive net income, and if you have positive net income, then there is a legal requirement to pay a minimum dividend. They have to, and I think that was the reason why Baier paid a dividend. That's what I took from the media anyway. Well, with this legal requirement, isn't it a question, therefore, of otherwise having the problem of challenges being raised? That's a wonderful question for the Baier press conference next Tuesday. Right. So note that down. Go. Well, I'm thinking about it anyway. But, well, I don't think I'm the only one interested in this. I've never heard a company talk about a minimum dividend payment. Well, as I said, it's a very good question for next week's press conference for the colleagues across the street. Then we have Mr. Finke from the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and then Tom Brown from ISF. Thank you very much. I have a question on Scope 3. If I understood you correctly, this is very important to you. You want the electricity that you get to be green, and that you have to have enough green energy. There's a discussion ongoing now with exiting coal. And will this really work in 2030? Is that also something that might be a potential problem for you, that will make things more difficult for you if we still need coal-powered power plants? Right. Well, the discussion on exiting coal, that's a political discussion. Of course, you can break it down to a technical discussion as well. The way the situation is right now, with the amount of energy that we require, with a strong industry, it will not be enough to exit coal in 2030. This is something that you can calculate very simply. And if you see the expansion of gas-fired power plants, whether they're hydrogen-enabled or not, this is something that is not picking up. Even based on serious estimates, there are very strong representatives in energy industry. They say at least 50 of these will be required until 2030, and then to be able to exit coal completely. So what I'm saying is, A simple calculation today is that exiting coal in 2030 is becoming less and less probable. You could say politically, what does that mean, exiting coal? Does that mean just 5% energy generated by coal? This is something that has to be discussed politically. What does that mean precisely? And that's why it's important to see to it that we have sufficient electricity so that this can be competitive as far as the costs are concerned, both for the private and the industrial end users. It's also important that we shouldn't just talk about yes or no coal exit. We have a lot of energy put into this in the positive sense of the term. In the figurative sense of the term, is putting into these discussions to expand renewable energy sources and facilities. We, as a company here in the private economy, we also have our contracts that we have to come up with. So we don't have less and less direct fluctuations or influence from the influence in the mix of energy. We don't want to be dependent on that. We can say so much of this will be green, we will buy that, and this will be at competitive prices, and that's what will be used by us. So as far as this discussion is concerned, I see that there is less of a risk for us. That is to say that our Scope 2 goals cannot be achieved. We believe that we can achieve them. And let me add one more thing. This discussion in Germany should not be compared with the situation globally. We see that in China in particular, in addition to all the issues in China, and we see a large number of coal-fired power plants being built, as well as the generation of green energy. And this is something that is making very good progress there. And I would also say that this is important in the state of Texas in the United States, where we have major production facilities. So the expansion of renewable energy is making rapid progress worldwide, and the discussions that we're having are primarily in Germany or European discussions. Other countries have come beyond this point and continue.
Thank you, Tom. Please go ahead.
Apologies to ask in English. Good morning, everyone. Just a couple of things. Just first off, regarding your projections for the automotive sector, it seems like after the growth of the last couple of years, things are still below where they were before the pandemic. So is that to say that, in your eyes, the auto industry has kind of stabilized at a lower base than it had before the pandemic? And just also on Scope 3, you mentioned investments of several hundred million euros over the next decade, and I wondered where in your 4 pillars that will be concentrated, and also in terms of creating a market for sustainable products. I know, Mr. Steilemann, that you were on the Antwerp Declaration. What would you like to see from European or federal policymakers in terms of creating a market for those products? Thanks.
Ja, schönen guten Morgen und ich muss mich jetzt schon vorab dafür entschuldigen, dass ich jetzt meine Frage auf Englisch stelle. Die erste Frage wäre die, und zwar Ihre Prognose zum Automobilsektor. Sie haben ja gesagt, dass wir hier ein Wachstum sehen über die Jahre, aber wir sind immer noch bei einem Niveau wie vor Covid, also wie vor der Pandemie. Kann man also dann sagen, dass wir jetzt die Situation sehen, dass sich die Lage stabilisiert hat, aber auf dem niedrigen Niveau? Zweite Frage zu den Scope-3-Emissionen. Sie haben ja schon erwähnt, dass Sie einige Milliarden Euro in die Hand nehmen werden in den nächsten 10 Jahren, um hier Investitionen zu tätigen. Wie sieht es aus mit den Säulen, die Sie früher auch genannt haben heute? Wie wird sich diese Investition auf die verschiedenen Säulen aufteilen? Nun weiterhin zum Markt. Sie haben jetzt auch eine Unterschrift geleistet der Erklärung von Antwerpen. Was erhoffen Sie sich jetzt von den Politikern und von dem Regulierer? Was können Sie dazu beitragen, dazu, dass ein Markt auch geschaffen wird? Vielen Dank.
Thank you. I reacted slightly slowly. We have translation services here, and that's why I had to wait for the translation to come across, and I'm going to answer it in German, but this answer is going to be interpreted simultaneously here in English. With respect to the automotive industry, we had 10% growth in passenger vehicles last year, 30% growth in electric vehicles, and I'm talking about purely electrical passenger vehicles. We're now seeing a mixed picture, or we expect a mixed picture for 2024 rather. The growth rate will decline substantially to a low to mid-range single-digit region. Nevertheless, we expect that the subsequent electric mobility will continue to grow by about 30% or more. This is news that may give rise to some restraint, because you could say, well, the sales aren't really that strong in passenger vehicles, but nevertheless, 2 to 3% growth in automotive means for us several thousand or tens of thousands of tons of products of more that we can sell in this area. The second good piece of news is that the growth rate and the share of electric vehicles that is increasing results in an increase in the materials that we can supply. This applies not only to conventional vehicles, but also to charging infrastructure, for example. Charging stations are being added continuously. Battery manufacturing is another area. We're talking about the encapsulation of battery cells, for example, where we become active. And of course, the increasing digitization of the interior of vehicles, in particular, big screens with a high degree of interconnectivity are also sales drivers for our products. Therefore, having said that, I wouldn't speak of a stabilization, but maybe a slowing of the growth rate, and also of, from where I stand, growth of the possibility to sell highly innovative specialty products from Covestro. Moving back to investments in Scope 3, that's another question that you asked. All told, for 1-2, we spoke about 250 to 300 million euros. And this is something that we also publish in our annual report. Added to this is in production operating costs. And what Mr. Steilemann just said earlier is a very important combination. We need to find a way to make this commercially attractive, not just for the environment and for the circular economy that we want to push for, but how do we create an environment in which our customers who are currently paying higher prices for circular products to reduce those prices. It's hard to peg this to investment, but if you have customers that based on their own steam or to comply with regulations are interested in sustainable products, then for us it's not an investment, it's actually neutrally from a commercial point of view. But of course, we're willing to make this initial investment ourselves. Okay, I can see that you're nodding, so that the questions were answered. Thank you very much. Are there any further questions from the floor? That doesn't seem to be the case. We will now move over to the virtual room. I'm just looking around once again.
Go ahead. I do have a question on steam. I thought that that was a very important pain point in your industry. In your annual report, it seems that reductions here, when you talk about the changes in production, that this is much lower than is the case for electricity. Maybe you could explain that to me. I thought that was a very energy-intensive production. Well, generating steam in the chemical industry can happen in different ways. Sometimes it's generated directly. For example, if you put something on your stove at home, the pot of water, and you put the cover on it, and then at some point in time the water turns to steam if you give it enough energy. And let's hope that the vapor pressure will, that the cover will hold it up. But this is the transition of transportation of energy. You need gas to do this. And then, of course, you see that you have expensive gas, expensive steam, and then you have thermal energy for the chemical processes. Now, this remains something that is the case for energy-intensive operations that use gas directly or gas and steam as a source of energy. This is still a major challenge. We, in part of our production, we are more energy intensive, but we are far removed from the energy intensity for certain chemical substances, for example, ammonia, which is used for the production of other things. Take glass, ceramics, paper, for example. This is where energy intensity is much higher than for our products. The second point is that we often have waste heat that we can also use in certain processes. If we can't use it another way, we use this waste heat and then we use it then to convert it to steam. And there are a number of different forms of steam, high, low, medium pressure, for example. And here it is quite logical that this network of steam should be structured as best as possible. Our colleagues in Ludwigshafen talk about a network, this network structure for steam. That's a very important issue. But once again, we are energy intense, but certainly not as energy intense as other chemical companies. For example, there are some that are less energy intense as well, of course. But roughly speaking, TDI is the most energy intense product that we produce, in addition to producing chlorine, but that's a different topic. And then we have MDI, then we have polycarbonate, and then all of the specialty chemicals. So the further you move towards the customer in the added value chain, the less energy intensive our products are. The more you move away from performance materials to specialties, the less energy intensive you are. So that means that the emissions, when we talk about CO2 equivalents, are much lower than you might have for what you might actually expect. Are there any other questions, follow-up questions that you need to answer in the room? Then we can move on to the virtual room, and we will take any other questions from the room if you come up with more questions. But now we're going to switch. I see that we have Patricia Weiss from Reuters. Ms. Weiss? Hello to all of you in Leverkusen. I would like to ask a question. I know that you can't really talk about the issues being discussed with Abu Dhabi, but it seems to be taking very long. Maybe you could give us a question of putting out a formal offer on the table. Here we're talking about the corporate strategy and corporate governance, as you said in September. Maybe you could at least tell us whether there has been any type of progress there, and how much management capacity does this take up when you talk about these long ongoing discussions? When you talk about the range that you gave us, maybe you could tell us what the driving factors are for the positive developments, and what do you expect? Do you expect any headwind here as well? Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Weiss, thank you very much. I don't know where you got your information from, where you read it, and when we talk about corporate strategy or corporate governance, I did not comment on that. I said it's in the best interest of our company, and it's in the best interest of our shareholders and all of the other stakeholders. These are how we are discussing our discussions with Abu Dhabi, and we have best intentions here, and this is also very open in our intentions here. And that's basically all that I can say at this point in time, because I believe it's important, and I tried to make this clear, that both parties are discussing these things together and not about one another, or certainly not in the media. I'd also like to turn to the question of the forecast for 2024. The range that you mentioned, 1 billion to 1.6 billion euros EBITDA, this is consistent with the range that we had last year as well. And that was the first time that we gave you the trend in the annual press conference. And then we limited to about 500 million for Q2, so that fits in very nicely. If you take the upper and the lower end of this range, then you will see, and you talked about volumes as well, and we are convinced that with our cost leading plants, we will also be able to ramp up the volumes. That's an important factor that we're working on. And the topic that depends on the market is the price and the margin development. And I think you can see the upper end and the lower end of this forecast. And you can see for the first half of the year, we will be a bit more hesitant with regard to the margin and volumes. They're doing very well. And if the second half of the year, if we see an improvement, then the upper end of 1.6 billion euros EBITDA is then realistic. And if, on the other hand, we don't see any improvement in the second half of the year, and if the margins due to a low demand would be relatively low as well, then we would be more at the lower end of the range. So that's the decisive factor there. Thank you very much. I see a follow-up question online. Mr. Schulte from the Westdeutsche Allgemeine Zeitung. Thank you very much, Mr. Steilemann. My question results from the questions and answers we've heard so far. And you've been asked several times about whether plants are going to be closed down, any sites are going to be merged. You didn't really give us a direct answer to those questions. At the same time, you stressed the fact that this is a German problem, not really a European or global problem. That is the question of high costs of energy here in Germany. And you also said that your strategy, which other competitors follow as well, having direct supply agreements for renewables, and you gave us an example of Antwerp and the United States. So there was nothing German there. So from all of this, I must ask you, does Covestro, are they moving towards relocating your production sites abroad, or can you have direct supply agreements to solve that issue? Well, thank you very much for your question. Well, maybe it's due to the fact that in Germany, we've already done this pioneering work. In other words, the largest global public power purchasing agreement for 100 megawatt is something that was concluded in 2019. And this is then something that will then be providing green energy at the German sites. So from this question, you can conclude that this switch is taking place in Germany. It began in Germany, and it will be continued in Germany. We simply have to see where, when, and how we can make progress globally. That is why the switch to green energy is something which is on our agenda in Germany, and this is something that we're carrying out step by step. So the second point is we do not plan to close down any German sites.
Thank you. I think that put everything into context. I can't seem to identify any further requests for the floor, at least not in the virtual room. Now I'm looking out to the audience here on site. Now there seems to be another question that's going to be asked in English in the virtual room. Andrew Mole, you have a question? Please go ahead. We'd love to hear from you.
Hi, thank you for taking my questions. It's clear that sustainability is a genuine passion of yours, and that you want Covestro to be doing to avoid greenwashing. My question is, to what extent would being taken over by an oil and gas company in general undermine your green branding? If it was a consumer company, I think there would be a problem there, but maybe it's different in chemicals. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about how you feel about that. Related to a previous question about the management time that you're spending on the talks. When in a takeover situation like this, I mean, if you were a football club, I think the players' heads would be turned. People would be approaching the players with offers and so on. So, is that an issue for Covestro as it's sort of dragging on, and it must be a slight burden for the time all of this is taking? So two things. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for your question. It's a quite intelligent idea of asking the question from that perspective. To get some further information, that allows for further or different interpretation. For this reason, it's important not to speculate about what would happen if a company that is committed to sustainability was acquired by a company, the main business of which was dedicated to entirely different sectors. Now, of course, this is highly speculative, and therefore I ask of your understanding that we will refrain from responding to such highly speculative questions, which, by the way, have nothing to do with Covestro's situation right now. We could maybe feed on each other over a glass of beer, but not at a press conference. Now, with respect to the talks with ADNOC that are ongoing, it's very important to emphasize that it's part of the normal task of management to discuss these issues, to approach such topics with an open mind, and this is exactly what management is doing. And of course, it's also a task of management to prioritize its daily work in such a way that these talks can be conducted well. And this is another thing that Covestro management indeed is doing. Now, what potential ramifications could be for the staff of Covestro or other issues, I can say that we don't have any specific fluctuation in any specific area. I really love working at Covestro. I believe that the company is positioned outstandingly well. At present, it's going through a brief situation that we presented to you, in which we have to establish some focal points in operations in order to make sure that our ship remains on track. But long term, we are going down the right path. And this is demonstrated by the fact that, quite obviously, there's interest in Covestro, interest from the outside. And this is because apparently our business model is very promising. Thank you very much. All that remains then is for me to take the obligatory look into the room. Now, should there be no requests for the floor here in person, and the same apply to the virtual room, then I and we would like to thank you all very much for your attention, for the questions that you asked. I hope that you received satisfactory answers. My sincere gratitude to the team here in the background, behind the scenes, that prepared the press conference, attended to it, and will do the cleanup work. Thank you for your attention. We look forward to you the next time around. Stay healthy, and we are happy to offer you a little snack for lunch now. Thank you so much. Thank you from me as well for your interest, for your very good questions, and I also look forward to our future Q&A sessions, and also for those of you who are here in person, to a common luncheon. And thank you to you, Christian, your first annual press conference for Covestro. I think it worked very well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lars, for facilitating, and thank you everyone else here.
Thank you for tuning in. In case you missed anything, you can always rewatch this live stream or have a look at our website or our annual report for more information. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. We'll get back to you as quickly as possible. Until next time.